We now move on to Robert Jenkins, who will tell us about Sir Charles Todd's involvement in astronomy. Robert is the president of the Astronomical Society of South Australia. He's following in Sir Charles's enormous footsteps, as Charles was the first president of both the Astronomical Society section of the Royal Society of South Australia in 1892 and the Astronomical Society of South Australia from 1901. Robert's been a member of the latter for several decades and interested in astronomy for most of his life. His particular interest is the history of astronomy, from its use in setting the seasons through ancient monuments like Stonehenge and the pyramids, to its role in timekeeping, including the setting of Easter, navigation, surveying and many other fields. His interest includes the astronomical work by Todd, A.W. Dobby, the Shearer brothers, David Adamson and many other early settlers of Australia. Robert.
I've just come to celebrate the life of one of our most illustrious founders, that's Sir Charles Todd. As I said, I have the honour of following in Sir Charles's footsteps in the part of his career as an astronomer. Todd's life as an astronomer started in 1841 when he, at 15, was employed by Sir George Airy, the Astronomer Royal in the Greenwich Observatory, as a supernumerary astronomical computer. That's just someone who does the calculations for the real astronomers. Anxious for real challenges, Todd in 1847 persuaded Airy to support his application to become an assistant astronomer to Professor Chalice at the University Observatory in Cambridge. He returned to Greenwich in 1854 as the superintendent of galvanic apparatus for the transmission of time signals via telegraph, to be an important part of his following life. In 1855, the South Australian government asked Airy to select a person to take the role of the government astronomer and the superintendent of telegraphs. Todd was not Airy's first choice. He was not certain that the young Todd, 29 at that stage, was still young, could manage the task. Airy tested Todd by sending him to Dial to do a problem with the time bobble. It turned out it was a very simple problem with the telegraph, and Todd fixed it very quickly, proving to Airy his skills, and he recommended Todd for the post, which he got in February at a salary of £400. Todd was actually about to ask his long-term love, the 17-year-old Alice Todd of Cambridge, to marry him. He'd known her since she was 13. The appointment brought this forward, and they married on the 5th of April. She was one of 11 children shown in this cutout there. Actually, I was in Cambridge a few years ago and had the pleasure of seeing Alice's house on Free School Lane in Cambridge. That's that one there. Alice and Charles left in June and reached Port Adelaide, as was said on the bark Irene. The bark became a cargo boat. The young Todds originally stayed in Woodville, then moved on to Angus Street and later to North Adelaide. Now, it was here that Todd started his astronomical observations. Well, this is the first recordings of his observations. And he was using spiral equipment mainly and some small telescopes he owned. It must be remembered that in the 19th century, astronomy was not for studying the universe or cosmology. It was about timekeeping, ship navigation and geodetic positioning for surveying. In 1856, the government signal station had been set up on the corner of Semaphore Road and the Esplanade. The main reason for this was to send the 1 o'clock time signals to the navigators of the vessels. Unfortunately, a message that was sent to Semaphore often was not quite right time. It was used to fire a 12-pound cannon, which caused some time delays, and the time that the report of the cannon firing was actually heard by the navigators meant there was up to 10 seconds delay, which meant the clocks weren't being set accurately. This was corrected, and I'll tell you about that later. It was not until late 1860 that the observatory and residence, especially built for Todd, better. I'm wondering why that panel wasn't on, for Todd was completed. Alice made the observatory a popular venue for local societies and the public. But when I say it was an observatory, it's a huge overstatement. This is basically the background as a backyard of the area, not much different to what it was like in the 1860s. Had a few astronomical gear which was brought in portable, but most of it was meteorological gear. The equipment that they used, one of these sorts of telescopes is the one Todd owned. Various reports say it was either the 2 3/4 inch or the 3 inch, The records vary, so we're not sure which one. But I have no idea how they saw anything through those telescopes. The eyepieces have tiny little lenses in them, which makes it almost impossible to see anything. You compare it to the modern lenses, which are huge. But yes, they did. They saw some fantastic things, and I'll describe them in a few seconds. One of the most important things Todd did as part of his astronomy was to set the exact location of the observatory. This was crucial for surveying. But again, Todd had to borrow equipment from Mr. C.H. Harris. He borrowed a silver-on-glass Newtonian telescope to do this because he didn't have good equipment. The state did not really have good equipment. It was not until 1867 that systematic observations were started. And those using a Sims transit telescope that was on loan from the Victorian government's Williamstown Observatory. When Todd was awarded a CMG in 1872, the government thought they better get him some better gear, and they decided to build a transit room, an anemometer tower and an office for the observatory. It wasn't until 1881 that the government actually bought a telescope for the observatory, and that's the Sims transit telescope there. That telescope was still in use in 1910, and it's the one you can see outside. That section is missing, but the two other bits are on display outside the door, so we still have that telescope. In 1873, the government provided about £800 for an equatorial mounted telescope and $500 for a building to house it. The Cook equatorial 8-inch refractor, which is 9 foot 11 inches long, was built by Cook and Sons of York, with Sir George Airy supervising the work for Todd. It had a clockwork tracking mechanism that controlled a revolving centrifugal governor. When the state governor at that stage, Lord Tennyson, was visiting the observatory, he asked about the mechanism, and Todd, in his usual way, replied, "That, sir, is a revolutionary governor." Is he suggesting that Tennyson wasn't revolutionary? Not sure. Anyway, the Observer newspaper in 1874 noted that it's protected by a dome, and you can see the dome there, weighing 2 tons, coated in shifted horizontally, with the base being supported on cannonballs running in a kind of groove railway. The red arrow marks them. They said it runs so smoothly a child can move it. The cannonballs were actually cast for the Crimean War, and Sir Charles was fond of pointing out that cannonballs could thus be made use of in the practical revolution of astronomy. Oh dear. Panel keeps on going out. This telescope, what have I done? Ah, we're back. Excuse me. This telescope was actually still in use in 1920 at the West Terrace Observatory, before being moved to outside of the Bar Smith Library, out in the open, and then it was put in the Adelaide University Observatory, where it's used to train many of the astronomers working today. And again, that's the telescope you can see outside in the foyer, with this piece unfortunately missing. We have yet to find it. The building and telescope commissioning was completed in time for the transit of Venus in 1874, which is one of the reasons why Todd encouraged it to be built. Accurate timing for the transit was seen as the best way to set the Sun-Earth distance, which was essential for setting the entire size of the universe. The astronomers were not confident with the observations that were made in 1761 and 69, and the 1874 transit was seen as a way of setting it correctly. For Todd, ingress, that's when the Venus actually first crosses the Sun, was clouded out. But he successfully observed the egress. And this is important, he noticed a purplish hue inclining to violet on the planet towards the Sun. And that was in this bit in here. Todd interpreted that as evidence for an atmosphere on Venus. Now, while this had been noticed by a Russian astronomer in 1761, he never reported in English publications, and it was Todd, we think, was one of the first people to recognise that Venus had an atmosphere and reported that in the English language publications. Todd was also generous with the people who worked with him. He gave credit to the work done by a lot of other astronomers who also reported on that transit, but he did note that some of the observations were that their uncertainty in the determination of time meant their observations may not be of great value. But he reported them, just doing the right thing. By the way, the last transit was in June this year, and the next one you'll have to wait until you're a little bit older, 2117. Todd also observed the comet in 1881, this one called 1881b, and he and his staff published several reports in the Royal Astronomical Society's publications, and these are actually Todd's drawings. To replace the Cannon semaphore and give the navigators more accurate timings, the government built a time ball system at Semaphore, and with Todd's experience in the past, he was the one who actually designed and established the system. The time ball was actually not dropped by the staff seated there, but by a telegraph system that Todd put in from West Terrace Observatory down to Semaphore. The first use of the time ball was on the 2nd of August 1875, which Todd supervised by putting a telescope on the tower of the house, which you saw in previous photographs. The actual ball was dropped by William Morgan, who at that stage was just an MLC, Chief Secretary. He later became a Premier of South Australia. The time signals actually from the Adelaide Observatory were so trusted they were set to places like Cocos Island and Durban eventually to set the time signals for the ships in many places around the world. Todd's astronomy continued as he observed the parallax of Mars in 1878, and by the early 1880s he and his staff were undertaking constant general astronomical work. A long series of notes on the phenomena of Jupiter's satellites was published in the Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society, of which he'd been made a Fellow in 1864. Although the astronomers and Todd complained about the seeing at West Terrace, the reports suggest they were seeing some very fine structures on the planets and the moons. Now, although this is disputed, Todd may have actually seen an aurora on Jupiter from one of the drawings he gave. It certainly looks like what you see from a Hubble telescope picture today of the top, and I have no idea how he saw it, but the drawings were there. The 1882 transit of Venus was not observed with much enthusiasm. By that time, people realised that accurately timing Venus crossing the Sun was very difficult, almost impossible, but Todd decided to give it another try. He headed to Wentworth because he realised that an early morning transit would be prove that. And so he went on a journey that included train, riverboat and coach travel over several weeks to get there. Oop. Next page, getting carried away. They actually set up at the Wentworth Jail, shown there, and he used a telescope that he bought from Benjamin Herschel Babbage. Now, for those who know a bit of history, he was the son of mathematician Charles Babbage, and the telescope was actually previously owned by Sir William Herschel. So it's quite an important telescope. I'd love to know where that one is. Todd's attention to detail can be shown by the fact that he tried to ensure that he had accurate timing, and just in case there were going to be clouds, he put a telegraph system to Wentworth, back to the Adelaide Observatory, so he could actually get accurate timings for his observations. He got it right, and as Todd reported, the sun rose in an unclouded sky on the day of the transit, and atmospheric conditions were all one could desire. In 1886, Todd was made an honorary MA of the University of Cambridge. It was Professor J.C. Adams, the co-discoverer of the planet Neptune, who was his sponsor. Now the important bit for me. It was in December the 22nd, 1891, that the first meeting of what became ASA was held. It was actually Mr. C.C. Farr who put in adverts in the paper and put pamphlets around the town, encouraging people, but it can be clear by this transcript of it that Todd was consenting to it. Actually, Todd was very keen to expand the understanding of astronomy and to ensure his work continued when he retired. The Society was actually formed on the 15th of February 1892 as the Astronomical section of the Royal Society, had 19 active members. Subs of 5 shillings, if you remember the Royal Society was half price, and records show that collecting subs was never easy. Hey, nothing changes, does it? And one of the most recalcitrant payers was Todd. Ladies were eligible to be members right from the start, and Alice Maud Todd was a member from 1894. The meetings were held at the Adelaide Observatory, lectures by members and a possible viewing. But more importantly, I think, if it was cloudy, Lady Todd provided a supper for everyone. She was a very, very hospitable person. Right, Todd was made a KCMG in 1893. And at that stage, he was a Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and many other societies. In 1889, he was also elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society of London. By 1895, we had 45 members in ASA. Now remember the size of the population, and that's a huge number of people who were active astronomers. Todd was asked, because of his expertise, to select the site of the Perth Observatory. The observatory building and instruments were designed and purchased by him. You can see there's a transit room on the left there, but more importantly on the right, as this popped up a bit fast, the building that was built there in 1895 is still in use as the Western Australian Astronomy Education Centre. The first Western Australian government astronomer was Ernest W Cook, who was actually one of the assistants of Todd, and he remained a close collaborator with Todd, including taking photographs of meteorological formations, cloud formations over the observatory. And this is the cover of a book which is actually out in the foyer, which was given to me recently, which Cook sent to Todd in 1898. Now, as you may know, Alice died on the 9th of August in 1898, aged 60, but the 72-year-old Charles continued to be very active in local issues. One of the key issues at the time was the Standard Time Act of 1898. After a period when each South Australian town had its own time slot, South Australia set its time 9 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time in accordance with the 1884 Meridian Conference in Washington DC, which meant every 15 degrees of longitude was an hour. So we fitted at that stage. But a proposal was put to Parliament by business interests, horrible people, that South Australia should put its clock 30 minutes forward and be closer to the eastern states. Todd was asked to comment as the official astronomer. Among the reasons advanced for those in opposition was that this would be equivalent to permanent daylight saving with detrimental effect, particularly those living in Ceduna. I heard that argument recently too. Todd encouraged wide consultation before a decision was made, and he and ASA strongly opposed the new time zone as it broke with worldwide convention. He countered that maybe the eastern states should come to 9 hours to match us. Forget them, forget this half hour. Unfortunately, Parliament voted 11 to 8 in favour of the 9.5 hour in front of Greenwich time zone, and to the disgust of Todd and the astronomers. In June 1901, after a dispute over money, the Royal Society just wasn't paying us our fair dues, so we said that's enough, and we actually removed ourselves from the Royal Society and became what we are today, the Astronomical Society of South Australia, which, by the way, was the original name that was proposed. By April 1902, Todd's health was actually failing. While he was active in astronomical debate and still our president, heard the beep, weighing in on lots of debates on the day, he was certainly not well. I mean, the sort of things he was involved in discussing was, one view was our sun was at the centre of the universe, or with a group of stars, the centre of the universe, and the Earth was the only planet adapted for life. Sir Charles suggested that any central location was transitory, and with our current speed we're probably most likely just passing through. He also thought it very rash that we were to say that we were the only life form in the universe. He also agreed with Herschel and others that it was least probable that some of the star clusters we saw or see were abundant in the Milky Way were actually distant universes. Now, it wasn't until 1925 that this was confirmed these were actually other galaxies, and Todd was actually ahead of his time in publishing papers supporting Herschel and others that we are one small galaxy in a huge universe. Todd continued to be elected as our president until the 1909 AGM. Now, he was renowned for his puns. As you see with this one, at a dinner in his honour in the Caledonian Society, it was mentioned that he has taken on astronomy in early life. When replying, he said, "That is because I was brought up in the good old Milky Way." Another one, when he met the politician Kingston, he expressed regret he could not agree with him politically. "How is that, Sir Charles?" Come on. Well, in me, Mr. Kingston, you observe a Tory. And he was. Sir Charles is remembered by ASA with our main observatory building housing the state's largest public telescope at Stockport, having the name of the Charles Todd Observatory. At heart, Todd was an astronomer and would love to spend more of his time at his passion. In his reports to the Royal Astronomical Society, he made the plea, "Please remember, when thinking of how little I do, I'm also from 1870 the Postmaster General and the Superintendent of Telegraphs." I doubt it can be fair to say he didn't do much. These are just some of the papers I've been able to find that he produced on astronomy alone. And there's 3 pages of these which will scroll behind me. He was a very prolific man, and in the numerous publications he wrote, he gave full credit to his collaborators, no matter how minor their role. Todd's love for astronomy was summed up by the Advertiser when it said of him, "Once a man is a dyed-in-the-wool astronomer, he can never be anything else." Now, this year, in 2012, the Astronomical Society instituted a Hall of Fame. And the three people instituted into the Hall of Fame, and one of them was, of course, Sir Charles Todd. In April, we gave the other 2 people their plaques. Today, I'd like to hand... Is Barry Todd here?
Yes, just.
Just, well done. I'd like to hand Barry Todd this on behalf of the Astronomical Society as the for Charles Todd's first being invested into our Hall of Fame. Thank you.
If I could just say thank you very much indeed. Today has not been a good day for me. The taxi we ordered didn't turn up. I got a taxi and the driver didn't know where this place was. And then finally he dropped me in the wrong place and I got absolutely soaked. But anyway, I'm delighted to be here. Finally, and I hope my wife and my niece will join shortly. But thank you very much indeed for this Hall of Fame, and it's much appreciated. And I accept it really on behalf of the 17 of us who are descended from Charles Todd who are here today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.